Hello and welcome, my name is Jay, and in this video I'll be seeing if I can turn this into some industrial terrain within 1 hour. Now when I last did one of these challenges, I did trash to terrain within 1 hour. I was pretty confident I would succeed. I've got to admit on this one I'm not 100% certain, so we'll see if I can do it. I'm going to be turning it into a classic fuel tank, and I'll have the little tablet that keeps time, and it's going to include drying time as well, so it's going to be a bit of a challenge. We'll crack on. The hot glue gun is fired up, the glasses are on so I can see the monitor on the camera to make sure everything's in focus. Yeah, let's go, let's start the clock. The first thing I'm going to do is take 2 Pringle can lids and glue them to either end of the one Pringle can just to make it symmetrical. And then we're going to work on the supports that are going to hold up the fuel tank. And what we're going to do here is just cut out pieces with foam board. So the first thing I do is just trace around the can onto some foam board, creating a circle, and then I think I measure 2 centimeters away from that on either end of it. And then I can't remember the exact measurements, but I figure out a way of making 2 pieces that are exactly the same and that look exactly what I want, which is basically a support that has like the circle in the middle. Once I've got the 2 of them, I basically just use one of them as a template to get a third. Cut that out of the foam board with a knife. If I'm honest, I feel like I just took way too long doing that for whatever reason. I wasn't prepared enough, I didn't think it through, I thought it'd be easier than it was, and it's not. And then I take some thin card and I cut out some 5cm strips. I'm going to use these as cladding for the side of the supports of the foam board, just so there's no foam showing. I glue them on with some super glue. To glue them onto the Pringle can, what I do is I just draw a line, which I'm going to call the bottom, and I'm just going to try and line them up the best I can. I just eyeball the first one, and then I do measure it for the second one, and I slightly measure it for the middle one. But yeah, I'm just hot gluing these to the base. Obviously, if you're not rushing with this, you can be a bit more precise. I'm eyeballing a lot of it. They may not be perfectly straight, but it'll do. As you can see, 20 minutes in, we've got the basic shape and the base, so we could in theory just paint that and call that a day. That would be boring. Obviously we're trying to do a little bit more than that. So what I'm going to use for this is some like generic plumbing pipe. I've got this like weird one that gives it a nice like industrial look, but the way that I'm going to do it is that you only get a certain amount of the like screwy on things. So there's a bit on the like pipe which is like an ugly indentation, so I'm going to hot glue one piece that covers that, and then I'm going to hot glue one bit that's like at the bottom, and then I'm just going to put the hot glue in and then screw it into place, trying to make it all so it's like looks nice. I also take off any writing that's on the plastic, so in this one I think it says Floplast. I try and scrape that off briefly with a knife and some sanding paper. Then I just line that up on the fuel tank where I want it to be, but then I realised, yeah, the best thing to do here is actually to make the base to glue it to rather than to just glue the pipe straight on. So I don't add that just yet. What I do add is something that I want to add, which is basically I'm just going to get some, I forgot the length of these, I think maybe like 5cm strips of card, and I'm just going to wrap them around the tube in sort of 2 sections. Now, number one here, the card is too thin, so it actually like, it's not perfect, but I just literally put on some PVA where I want them to be, so like, you know, one on each side. And I'm going to take the card and literally just wrap it around. Sorry for the PVA bottle that's slightly in the way. And just wrap it around. For the bottom of it, I'm trying to make it so that the seam is at the bottom. I just use some hot glue because I want this to be quick, obviously. Do that for both of them, of course. Thicker card would have been better, but it is what it is. Not going to lie, I am very much behind schedule. Where's my basing material gone? And then we are onto the base. So what I use here is I'm using some 5mm thick EPVC. It's not the cheapest of materials, but I wanted this base to be sturdy, so I would recommend like MDF or this EPVC if you can get it. And initially I just eyeballed it and then I just tried to draw it straight lines. It took me a little while to cut this because it is relatively thick and it takes a little while, and I must say that my cut not perfectly straight, which was embarrassing. Once I got the base done, I can just glue everything together. Literally just hot glue on the bottom of the supports and hot glue on both ends of the pipe to glue it both to the can and to the base. And you know, it's starting to take shape. And then I use these lids, which I get from some baby food pouches, but I think you can maybe be able to get them for yogurt. They're not very expensive anyway, but they make this sort of like classic ventilated look. I literally just take some hot glue, whack it on the bottom of the lid, and I just glue them onto my bit of card, you know, maybe just to make it look like that was the intention and the reason that it's there. Very, very, very luckily, I've actually made it so that the things that are in the lid are actually lining up. I think that was chance rather than by design. Okay, little update why I changed the camera position. Basically, I'm 37 minutes in and 47 seconds, and this is how far we've got. Now, this is how it looks. It's not amazing, and if anything, I'm way behind schedule. I told myself I probably needed 20 minutes for the painting step, and I'm gonna add a walkway to this with a ladder at one end, and then I was gonna add some like extra piping and stuff like that. That's probably a 10-15 minute job if I'm honest. So failure looks imminent. And I've got to say, stuff like this card hasn't worked perfectly. I've not got these perfectly in the center. It's a bit of a hodgepodge bash job, but you know, it is what it is. I'm trying to do it in an hour, and it's a fairly sizable piece, so we'll see how far we get. For the walkway on top, I'm taking the classic knitting mesh, or granny grating you might hear it called. I eyeballed the measurement and then just cut it as flush as I could. Obviously the length I actually did measure. Cut that out so it's in a nice rectangle that fits onto the Pringle can, and then I take some chipboard and just basically repeat the same measurement. And then I very quickly try to do some basic math to get something that looks vaguely like symmetrical, so I can do it in 3 sections. The maths I think I used here was something like a 7-inch hole with a 1 centimeter gap. Now it didn't end up being perfect because I think the actual distance I needed to cover here was 21.5 centimeters, but it was close enough. I cut out the holes into the chipboard and glued that pretty much directly straight onto the knitting mesh using some PVA. I think I might have used some super glue as well just to make it so it all stuck together quickly. I glued the walkway to the top of the Pringle can simply using some hot glue. I did think about adding some supports, but didn't really have time. And then for the ladder, I'm using these classic plastic tennis rackets. I got this idea from Eric Hobby's workshop. Just literally clip these plastic tennis rackets out, clip it so it looks like a ladder, and glue that on as soon as possible. I think I'm using hot glue again, which does not give you the greatest results, but is very speedy. And then on one side, I really wanted to use this sort of like corrugated tube that I've got, which I think is for electrical wiring, but obviously I'm using it here for terrain. And I was like, all right, I'll have it so it glues down, and then I'll do a right angle. And this is really where it all starts to go wrong. I realised that my piping isn't going to work the way that I want it to, so I get the sort of like kids industrial pipe set. I'm not 100% sure what they're called, but they're pretty common. You just sort of push fit the pieces together, and what I do is on one side of it, I'm like, I'm going to create this sort of like T and have it look like it's going into the side of the fuel tank as well. I was like, oh, that's pretty good. And then on the other hand, I'll have it go into the pipe like at the bottom. I was like, yeah, that's all looking good. Then I came to glue it, and I tried to glue the pipe to the side of the fuel tank in this sort of like weird arch shape, and then I just realized that I don't know why the pipe would do that, and it looked pretty ugly. So I had to very quickly, and I say quickly, it wasn't particularly quickly, figure out an alternative method. The 1 hour mark has approached, and I need to think of a way of fixing this. And what I ended up doing was just using more and more of the kids piping section. I cut the corrugated pipe like in half and just sort of used some of the kids piping material to look like the pipe was going in there at like deliberate places. It's not what I initially envisioned, but you know what? It actually looked all right. Some of the joy of creating this kind of like industrial terrain is actually taking your time and figuring out what's going to go where. Putting a little bit of a time limit on that really did sort of take a bit of the fun out of this and basically increase my stress. Look, there we go. The whole thing has been built. It's not exactly the way I envisioned it, but it's built, and I'm going to go and spray it brown. It is what it is. Let me go spray it brown with this low pressure brown. I'm not going to film this because, well, I'm going to do it quickly. I'm a bit sad that I've already failed, if I'm honest. dry brushed that with a metallic silver. Now this metallic silver didn't really seem to be taking, so I ended up mixing in a little bit of a grey paint just to sort of get it to like kick off. But then I realised actually I need to do the base, so for the base I'm going to paint it grey and then sponge on some lighter shades of grey to make it look like concrete, and I was very much aware that on the time level that this might be a bit of a pain in the bum, so I paint the base grey and then I just continue to dry brush the rest of it like silver or a bit of silver and grey together, just to try and get like a rustic feel. It's quite a common technique to paint it brown and then dry brush it silver. It gives you sort of like an aged metal kind of look. I also realised I really need some colour on this, otherwise it's going to look a bit weird. So what I did was the non-stripy bits on the fuel tank I paint blue, and the way that I do that is I literally just take some dark blue and I just stipple it on, trying to not go to like the edges perfectly, trying to leave it like rough and worn to make it look like it was aged. And ultimately that I think really made the core difference here. And for the base, as I said, I just take a lighter shade of grey and a bit of white actually, mix it together, and I just sponge onto the base, trying to blend it as best I could. And ultimately I think that looks fine. Okay, gonna stop the clock there. My initial reaction is disappointment. Not only because we failed, that's 1 minute and 30. Let's stop it before it gets to 1 minute and 30. 1 minute and 31. But I'm not overly, the paint job is terrible. Because I didn't really want to go above 1 hour 30, so I've mixed paint together on the thing. I'm like trying to dab on white to make it look like a concrete paint. We'll have a look at some prettier pictures and then I'll come back and talk about my thoughts. Before we look at the prettier pictures for this one, do consider liking this video if you liked it and subscribing to the channel if terrain is something you are interested in. Other than that, you can always go maybe the little extra mile. It's your choice to support me on Patreon. I would really very much appreciate that. Well, let's have a look at the prettier pictures. So looking at the prettier pictures, it's not amazing for sure, and it obviously took an hour and a half, which is longer than the hour that I really wanted to make this in. But looking back at it, like, yeah, you can tell I've not done a great paint job. I actually maybe have oversprayed in places, which has caused blobs. My hot glue gun has caused blobs in places. Some things aren't really glued down properly. The little knitting mesh on the top isn't perfectly cut. The ladder isn't perfectly straight. Maybe all the supports in the middle aren't perfectly painted. You know, that's the kind of thing you're going to do if you're going to super duper rush. But the whole experiment really is to see what kind of thing I can do quickly, like in an hour. And I thought this one would be a challenge. I didn't think I would basically go an hour and a half rather than say like, you know, an hour and 10 minutes. But, you know, looking at it now, the paint job's not perfect. I've tried to do that classic thing, spray it brown, dry brush it silver, and then just do a bit of colouring in. And on the floor I tried to do that concrete effect by painting it grey, which then I had to dry. It was a bit like sloppy, and then I sponged on a bit of a colour. You can see in places where there's grey where there shouldn't be and that kind of thing. But you know, it's a fail, but not an ultimate fail. There's lessons to be learned. Like, don't rush if you don't have to. That kind of thing. There's no real need to. I would have liked to have had the pipe perfectly in the middle. You can see it's actually slightly to the one side. And I would have actually liked to have raised the whole thing so it was perfectly in the middle. Hey, look, I mean, it's a fail, but it's a passable fail is what I would call that. I'm gonna call that a passable fail, especially for the hour and a half that it took. I'm very disappointed that it took me longer than that. But I think on the table, for an hour and a half worth of work, it's fine. It's not amazing. It is what it is. There we go. It was I maybe bit off more than I could chew with that one. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe, because it was a lot of effort. So let's do that. And Patreon, Facebook, all that kind of stuff. Have a most beautiful day. I'm quite tired after that, actually, just rushing around trying to get everything done. It's sort of taken a bit out of me. Have a beautiful day. Goodbye.